Hello everyone, this is part 17 of What If Naruto Was a Puppeteer, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
A building exploded behind him as Naruto dashed down an adjacent street. He hoped that the smoke and dust would cover his sudden change in direction, but it was a slim hope at best. Anything that one Pain saw, the rest did too. He found that out the hard way when he tried to double back and ambush one. It only earned him a nasty burn up his left arm. The one that the Hokage had called Shurado was one to watch out for. Naruto wasn't sure if the human puppet thing had a limit on what it could transform its body into, and he didn't particularly want to find out. Right now, it was at least predictable, preferring to pepper Naruto's general location with slim black canisters that exploded on contact with any surface. Naruto wasn't even sure he could get a ceiling tag to do that, too many variables for it to be worth it. That one wasn't even the worst. Gakido, or the Preta Path, Naruto admittedly wasn't that familiar with old ninja philosophy, was proving to be a nightmare. Its ability to drain chakra from anything close to it was proving extremely difficult to work around. The other one chasing him, Ninjendo he believed, didn't appear to have any kind of outward ability to speak of, although, the Sandaim's warning to not let it get close echoed in his mind, but was just as fast, strong and tough as the rest. It also wielded those extremely annoying black rods that apparently all of them could make. One scratch and anything chakra-based went haywire. Naruto didn't exactly have the luxury of engaging in any kind of elegant or evasive taijutsu with his puppets, not when one was trying to blow him up, and the other was attempting to drain him dry. Puppets filled the streets around him, attempting to lay traps as best they could in their limited time frame. He had a good map of the village in his head thanks to the many clones he had sent on various chores, but working off pure memory alone proved near impossible, and the fact that the Asura Path had no qualms blowing up any potential landmarks wasn't helping. He was using the technique he had developed to see through his puppet's eyes, but the vision he got through them was limited at best, and he had never used it on so many at once. It was like trying to watch 5 different screens at once while somebody threw kunai at you. Actually, that sounded positively easy in comparison. He turned another corner and dived forward, sliding across rubble-strewn ground. Gakido was only a few seconds behind, rounding the corner with a singular kind of intensity. Ramia, from the next street over, launched a small canister into the air. It promptly exploded outward, briefly filling the sky with blinding light. He hoped that would prevent the other two from seeing as Arakun emerged from her hiding spot, body turned. Long, thick strands of adhesive shot out from her spinnerets, rapidly forming a glistening barrier across the street. The Preta Path was no fool though and stopped before his momentum could force him into the trap. Naruto wasn't an idiot either. He pulled the chakra string connected to the tag he had dropped mid-dive, now directly behind Gakido's feet. The blast was hardly damaging, but it had enough force to slam the human puppet into the web. Naruto grinned, only for the expression to twist as he rolled backwards, narrowly avoiding the hum of a buzzsaw opening his throat. Shurado's permanent, manic grin taunted him as the cowled path stalked forward, other arm shifting into a nasty-looking cannon of some kind. Ramia exploded through a wall, showering the Asura Path with debris. Pain's body turned to swipe at the puppet, but now that Naruto could bring his full concentration to bear, they seemed evenly matched for speed for once. Although, that probably had more to do with Pain's concentration being split between 2 battles. He glanced over just in time to spot Ninjendo cutting the Preta Path out of his webbing with one of those damned black rods. He forced Ramia to spin, tail whipping out like a battering ram to slam the Asura Path to the side. It created a gap in their line that he immediately capitalized on, jumping onto Ramia's tail and practically surfing her as she slithered off again, beginning the chase anew. If he didn't think of something to break the stalemate soon, he was going to quickly run out of tricks. Hiruzen shifted to the side, neatly stepping around another invisible blast of force. 5 seconds, that appeared to be the minimum recharge period before Pain could use the technique again. He had the bruises on his chest to confirm that little experiment. He swung Enma forward, willing the staff to extend at the peak of the arc. He aimed it at Tendo, and the man naturally moved to the side, but at the last minute he forced his weapon down, digging it into the ground. He willed the staff to contract again and was thrown forward from the abrupt shortening. He released his grip and flew through hand seals, neatly mirrored by the shadow clone that had managed to circle around the Naraka path. Kaiten, Kuryu Enden. The dragon of pure flame flew true, and would have struck Jigakudo at the same moment as his clone's wind technique if the ground beneath the path didn't suddenly burst open. The flames were fanned into a blistering vortex, but their only victim was the hideous centipede summon the animal path had conjured up. He hadn't yet seen the limit of what Chikoshodo could summon, and right now it was increasingly looking like it was whatever he wanted. He landed just in time for a monstrously large rhinoceros to come barreling in from his left. It was just barely diverted from spearing him through with its jagged horn as Enma slammed into its head from the side. "Thank you, old friend," he gasped. He hadn't exerted himself like this in years. "Thank me by surviving Hiruzen, you haven't made it this far to be brought down by some upstart braggart claiming to be G." Enma was thrown backward, slammed right through a building as Pain's heavenly subjugation picked him up and tossed him aside as easily as a ragdoll. Hiruzen didn't miss a beat, pivoting and throwing out a handful of shuriken. His old partner wasn't so brittle that such a blow could put him down. Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The flying weapons multiplied in an instant. 5 becoming 20, becoming 100. Pain simply drew one of his chakra rods and deflected any that got close with contemptuous ease. "Is this all you have for me, Hokage? Old monkeys and brittle metal. You were once called a god yourself, but age has crippled you." The Sandaime smiled, bringing his arm up as the adamantine staff flew back into his hand. "On the contrary, age has given me much perspective, wisdom, and the pleasure of seeing new generations rise up to surpass their predecessors." His eyes glancing up was the only warning Pain received as a shadow rapidly grew over his form. Kuchio's Yatai Kuzushi no Jutsu. Gamabunta slammed down on top of Tendo's body like a meteor, scattering dust and debris in every direction as his full 200 tons of weight cratered the ground. One of Pain's summons lurched forward, a grotesque panda that looked to be sculpted from rock, but the enormous toad summon merely lashed out with the equally massive Tanto at its side, slicing it clean in two. "Sorry to be late, Sensei," Jiraiya called with his trademark grin, sliding down off Gamabunta's back to land beside his former teacher. "These ugly bastards are all over the village, and I've had to summon Ken and Hiro to put 'em down. Left me a bit light on the ol' tank. Your timing is as immaculate as ever, Jiraiya." The white-haired super pervert cracked his neck as he observed the other two paths watching them warily. "So, these are the guys that took down Hanzo. Don't look too tough." Gamabunta lurched backwards, arms flailing as an enormous force from below threatened to capsize the boss summon. Only his surprising dexterity prevented him crushing a couple of houses as he stumbled backwards, revealing an unruffled Tendo standing in the crater below. "Jiraiya-sensei, I was beginning to wonder if you would make an appearance." The jovial Sanin froze, unable to tear his eyes away from a sight he thought could only haunt his dreams. "Yahiko." Kisum grunted as he used his sword to divert another bone-shattering kick to the side. There was no blocking these blows. He was afraid even Samehada might crack under this kind of force. It had already lost some scales when the bowl-cut beast in front of them had tapped into the 5th gate. Guy was now on the 6th, and was all the more terrifying for it. He moved like a one-man hurricane, and Kisum loved every moment of it. He hadn't faced an opponent this good in years. Itachi was always fun for a quick spar, but his Uchiha companion was always the subtle, slippery sort, never one for a direct fight. This was what Kisum lived for, ever since gutting Fuguki and grabbing his destiny by the handle. He roared his approval and dived forward, slamming another roundhouse to the side and continuing the sweep of his sword, bringing it around to shave into Guy's back. Samehada barely brushed his flak jacket before his foot touched the water and the man vanished again in a burst of pure speed. Kisum felt something in his arm groan warningly as the green beast's foot brushed it. Samehada fed him some chakra to heal it, but his sword was beginning to run low. Even on the rare occasions he did manage to brush Guy, Samehada barely stole any chakra. Whatever technique the man was using, it seemed to internalize all of his energy. Another brutal kick spun him around and he scowled. Fighting was fun, but getting kicked around wasn't. He dived forward, spearing into the dome of water below him like it was air and speeding off down into the depths. The familiar tingle of same had emerging with him, lending him its power directly, enveloped his body as it shifted into something more shark-like. He turned in the water, looking up in time to see Guy leap into the air. He had expected the man to follow him with his typical fist-first approach. Instead, in the next moment he saw fire begin to rain down from the sky. Kisum couldn't help but scoff, as if a simple Kaiten technique would be able to breach his water dome. However, his eyes widened comically as he noticed that it was beginning to grow awfully warm inside the dome. Steam blocked his view of the other combatant as fire just kept raining down. Despite the sudden warmth, Kisum felt a cold shiver travel the length of his spine. Two of his hearts detached from his back as he strode forward, pulling out writhing masses of his Gyeonggu for their bodies. His wind and fire hearts he forced down his arm, the black threads bulging grotesquely to make room for the two masks. Both launched devastating techniques, merging together and fueling one another until he had a controlled spout of fiery death cascading from his arm. He swept it around him, hoping to catch the damnable wind user. He was the highest bounty present, and the only one capable of breaking through his Doton, Domu. His arm suddenly jerked upward, captured again by the Nara's technique. It broke almost instantly as his lighting mask swooped down to harass the shadow user, but it cost him a surefire kill on the Sarutobi. He didn't quite see out of his masks, but he could glean vague warnings from them. His water mask was warning him of somebody rushing up from behind. He turned, the skin around his arm hardening to diamond-like toughness as he speared it forward. His new attacker sidestepped his strike, and the following sweep, moving with a kind of preternatural grace. He didn't need to see the eyes to know it was a Hyuga. He almost wanted to laugh as he felt her fingers slam into his body, aimed at vital points that on most other opponents would have been crippling. They felt like a child's breath against his iron skin. Hinata. The Nara called out as his fire and wind hearts shifted around to face her. She was caught unprepared by the failure of her ambush and would have been roasted if the boy didn't use his shadow to roll her beneath the conflagration. Hyuga Hinata, Kakazu recognized the name. A bounty not quite on the same level as Asuma's, but he was sure he could wrangle a good deal out of a clan heir like her. He moved forward, but blinked in shock as the girl shot forward faster than he would have expected. He hardened his body again as she closed in, already bringing his masks around to finish her off, but grunted as her palm slammed into his chest. Those were not the light taps of the Juken. What looked to be flaming lines of pure chakra wreathed her hands, and the blow was enough to knock the wind out of him. The next wasn't so merciful, bypassing his Doton technique entirely and reducing his heart to pulp. He knew, even as his vision blurred and he felt the wind heart shifting to take its counterpart's place, that the Hyuga would not be fooled by playing dead. No matter. He would just take her heart as payment. The extendable pike was still stuck through his chest as Hidden laughed in delight, observing the behemoth fall. The red-haired man's body shrank as he dropped through the sky, bearing cuts and scratches that perfectly matched the ones already healing across Hidden's skin. He ripped the telescopic spike out of his heart and gasped at the clarity the pain brought him. It seemed to crystallize the moment, searing it into his soul forever. He heard the illusionist cry out the man's name, but was beyond caring for a dead man now. He felt his ritual fade away and yearned to begin it anew, but the raven-haired woman had so far proved elusive. It wasn't nearly as easy to get a drop of blood from her as it had been from the lumbering giant. He shot forward and cleaved her in two, only for her image to distort and twist, shifting unnaturally as pale skin became rough bark. It was like watching a tree grow in fast forward as the thick wooden boughs ensnared his limbs, completely immobilizing him. The woman appeared in front of him in a flurry of petals, her red eyes blazing with fury as she drew a kunai. He so wanted to see that intensity twisted into terror and pain, before vanishing as the light bled from her eyes. Before she could come closer with the ninja wire in hand, he bit down hard on his tongue, managing to sever the very tip. The pain shattered the genjutsu and he lurched forward, unrestricted. He nearly had her, scythe coming around in a beautiful arc of red, but more wood grew in to grab and pull at his body, once again bringing him to a stop. Over Iwusion. He snarked through the blood pooling in his mouth. Fo umquive. He still had enough mobility to bring his scythe back around, slamming all three blades into his stomach. The pain was ecstatic, but the branches didn't vanish. This one's not an illusion, a masked figure snarled as he dropped from a nearby roof, already flashing through hand seals. The branches around Hidden's body constricted, twisting his arms until they snapped. Even through the pain he kept his grin. I'll make a goob hacrifith. Katsu. Another building exploded outward, walls scattered across the neighboring streets and a beautiful plume of smoke wafted up into the sky. Even so, Deodara saw the telltale streak of silver that told him his foe hadn't been similarly scattered with it. Another flock of clay birds rained down on the slippery copy nin, jinking madly to avoid the flurry of lighting ninjutsu he sent up at them. Blast after blast cratered the ground and Kakashi somehow avoided them all. Sometimes it was speed, sometimes it was just a clone, every time it was infuriating. The cycloptic Junin couldn't escape him though, not with the reticule over Deodara's left eye constantly tracking him. Finally, he grinned as Kakashi sprinted right into his trap. The man darted inside a roofless building only to find the walls coming alive. Thin, almost papery centipedes of clay scuttled out of every crevice, rapidly entwining around the man until all you could see of him was that infuriating Sharingan eye. How Deodara hated that eye. His dragon swooped lower so he could get a better view, but paused in its descent. Deodara's vision blurred ever so slightly around edges and he immediately pulsed his chakra, his pupil dilating as he had trained it to do. The genjutsu shattered and he leapt to the side just in time to prevent a lightning-sheathed hand spearing through his heart. He gritted his teeth against the pain as it instead cleaved right through his shoulder, nearly taking the arm off. He rolled with the momentum, allowing himself to drop from his mount even as it bloated obscenely behind him. The explosion buffeted his body as he fell, but his good hand managed to spit out a wad of clay that broke his fall. He rolled to his feet and released a wordless shriek of frustration at the injustice of the Sharingan. First Itachi, now this clown. He was going to destroy them all. He was going to destroy everything. Sasuke had improved. The little pining child that had so often asked him to help with a new technique was gone. Itachi felt the twangs of pride and melancholy reflect dully off his steely facade. His face could show nothing of his emotions. Not the joy he felt when he saw the depths of Sasuke's power in the crackling lighting around his brother's hand. Not the despair that threatened to overwhelm him when he thought how little he had to do with that growth. Their dance was an elegant one, a movement between two partners who knew each other intimately. Their fighting styles were similar, if diverging in different directions. Itachi had always been a prodigy at whatever he tried, it just came naturally to him. He had mastered the Uchiha stances to perfection, then found them wanting. He altered them, making them better suited to his subtler nature. Sasuke had never finished his training, Itachi had stolen that from him along with everything else. He had taken the half-learned kata of his taijutsu and made them his own. Experience fighting through a war had been his teacher, letting him know what worked and what could be discarded. Through it all he had built up a large repertoire of techniques, primarily ninjutsu, that he seamlessly blended into his fighting. Mostly Raiten techniques, although considering the fact that he had been fighting mostly Kumo nin, that was to be expected. A stroke of good luck, as from the strength of his jutsu, Sasuke appeared to be lightning-natured. It also allowed him to do things with the Chidori that its creator could never have dreamed. Where Kakashi had improved its power into the Reikiri, Sasuke had focused on the shape manipulation and made it a truly versatile technique. He was a trueborn Uchiha just coming into his prime, and to his older brother, it was a sight to behold. And it still wasn't enough. Itachi diverted the teen sword to the side almost contemptuously, slipping an explosive tag on the underside. He had wreathed his hand in the faintest coating of Fuyuten chakra to dampen the buzzing edge of his brother's blade, then used that to take a swipe at Sasuke's eyes. It was an incredibly ingrained reflex that had Sasuke ducking back hastily, instincts to protect his dojutsu overriding everything else. It was something he would have been trained to compensate for by their father, and Itachi exploited it ruthlessly as he used the moment to weave another genjutsu. Sasuke had come far, but he had so much farther to go. Naruto dived through the window of a burned-out house, ripping the tattered remains of his jacket off and tossing it to the side. The moment he felt the human path follow him he substituted with it, simultaneously releasing the explosive seals inscribed on the lining. Paranoid what now? The blast rocked the already hollowed-out house and Naruto was forced to roll out of the way of a support beam as he sprinted out through another window. The Asura path was waiting for him on the other side, but so was Ramia. The heavy puppet burst out of the ground and grabbed Shurado's legs before pulling down, burying him up to his waist. A distraction, giving him a few seconds at best. Pain swooped down and he leapt up, grabbing onto an outstretched talon and using it to propel him up onto the adjacent roof to continue his mad dash. It was in sight now. The predator came barreling out of nowhere, arms outstretched to capture him in a bear hug he wouldn't be escaping from. He stumbled as Naruto used his strings to wrench a roof tile out from under him. The slight hesitation gave Hane enough time to turn on a Ryo in midair, the spin propelling a dozen lethal feathers at Gakido. Without chakra in the technique to absorb, all he could do was raise his arms to block them as Naruto raced past. He burst through the doors of his building almost as recklessly as when he had been poisoned, sprinting right up the far wall of the stairwell without stopping. Despite his haste, for the first time since the fight started, a genuine grin lit up his features. The three paths followed him barely a moment later, but he had already vanished. "You're in my world now," his voice called out, echoing off so many walls as to almost make it nonsensical. The inherent taunt, however, couldn't be misunderstood. The three human puppets fanned out, rushing through the building. It was only a matter of one of them spotting him for the others to know his location. He had no intention of simply waiting for them to find him though. His first stop had been to grab a spare jacket. He would need the pockets as he went about storing only his most precious and important possessions. In his mind, he was already apologizing to everything else as he ducked into his workshop. The Asura path unwittingly followed him in seconds later, but only saw a barren space filled with racks upon racks of lifeless puppets. That changed when he walked further into the room. The puppets nearest to him, copies of Ramia, abruptly lashed out. A thick tail struck Shurado's leg, bringing him to his knees. He raised an arm, shifting it into a buzzsaw to ward off the suddenly animated puppets, only to find the blade jammed by a wad of adhesive. Another puppet threw herself on top of him, nearly burying him under her bulk. His Akatsuki cloak tore open at the shoulders to make way for 4 extra arms, each of which grabbed a puppet and roughly threw him off. The strength that implied, considering each Ramia weighed almost 4 times that of an average person, was staggering. More puppets swam through the melee to join the dogpile, looking to bury the Asura path through sheer numbers. The crown of his head suddenly folded open, revealing a strange metallic mechanism around a circular depression. It glowed warningly for only a moment before every puppet was blasted back, the crack of it resonating through the entire building. Using the moment of reprieve, all 6 of Shurado's arms shifted into something else. Another buzzsaw, a humming blade, a cannon with no visible ammunition, 2 poles crackling with electricity, something that looked like a vacuum cleaner and web of prehensile cables formed from distended fingers. Standing there, crouched low to the ground like a cornered animal, it looked the very picture of death. Naruto had timed it to perfection, as at that moment the human path rushed in. Chakra strings lashed out, connecting to key joints across Shurado's body. Naruto didn't waste any time even trying to contest his will against pains and immediately flooded his connection with the Kyuubi's chakra. Soen, Jasu, he ground out through gritted teeth, once again contesting 2 powerful wills in a battle of dominion. He had learned his lesson though, shunting the Kyuubi's power out of his body as quickly as it was called forth. It proved too much for the human puppet and the Rinnegan in his eyes winked out, replaced by a slitted red. Foreign information suddenly swarmed in Naruto's mind as the basics of the Asura path's abilities became known to him. The human path was caught unawares as its supposed ally suddenly turned on him, a buzzsaw coming around to slice his arm off. He tried to leap back, but was overtaken by a net of wire-like fingers that held him in place as the chakra cannon charged. Naruto didn't hold back, using all of the chakra pain had so helpfully provided and shunting it out in one titanic burst. A shrill whine filled the air as the room was bathed in white, and when he next looked, Ninjendo was simply gone. Just in time too, as Pain finally managed to reassert his will over Shurado, a little too late. In that moment's hesitation between the shift in control, the Asura path was completely vulnerable. 10 different water cannons charged up as one, and when they were through, little remained of Shurado but sparking mechanical limbs. Naruto wanted to allow himself a grin of satisfaction, but couldn't afford to as the predator path came barreling into the room. He charged right through the crowd of puppets, causing them to fall limp just from sheer proximity. The blonde snarled, he was by far the most annoying of the paths. He ducked out his hiding place, dropping his henge that made him look like a common dummy, and sprinted back across the room. He avoided Gakido's grasp by inches to jump out the adjacent window, catching himself on the far wall of the stairwell. He held himself there a moment, muttering a brief apology, before backflipping to land in a crouch at the base of the building. The chakra strings he had been latching onto the walls before his leap all pulsed as one, discordantly excited against Naruto's irritation at what he was being forced to do. He barely dived through the outside doors before the entire building summarily imploded. Strategic explosive seals brought the entire structure down in a controlled demolition designed for maximum damage to anything inside, without damaging any of the surrounding buildings. He rolled to a stop on the street, rubbing at where a few stray bits of rubble had struck him. So, his calculations hadn't been perfect, but close enough. The entire building was just a smoking pile of debris, tons of concrete neatly piled in a rough heap. Absorbed that, he muttered impudently, taking in the sight of his home in ruins for a final time before turning to go back and assist the Hokage. He had barely taken 2 steps before he felt the familiar sensation of weightlessness followed by the harsh wake-up call of being slammed into unyielding masonry. He groaned lightly as he picked himself out of the wall, turning a watery gaze to where Pain stood, just now lowering his arm. "I warned you, that struggling was futile," he said. Even now, his voice didn't waver. "Destroy as many of my bodies as you like, they are replaceable. You do not face a man, or an army, you face a god. The only action you can take, now, or later, is to succumb." Naruto chuckled as he staggered to his feet, cracking his shoulders. The aches were beginning to pile up, but he couldn't afford to show any of it. Killing Sasori clearly didn't do the Akatsuki's research any favors. "If you'd brushed up a little better, you'd know that I'm really bad at giving up." He briefly wondered where the Hokage was, and how Pain had managed to get away from him. Thankfully, his worries were assuaged as he noticed a thin staff extend up into the sky some distance away, fending off a huge summon that looked like a giant, skinless bat. Pain's eyes narrowed as he raised his arm again, a chakra rod slipping into the other hand. Bansho Tenon. Naruto flew forward, limbs flailing behind him, but this time he was prepared. At the last moment he substituted with a henged dami. Suddenly, it wasn't Naruto impaled on the chakra rod, but Konan, complete with the perfectly straight seams across her skin that flaked off into illusory sheets of paper. Naruto wasn't sure what to expect from that move, banking on anything from indifference to a moment of hesitation. What he hadn't expected was for Pain's eyes to widen as the orange-haired man froze in place. He looked totally stunned, even as Konan's image wavered and shattered from the disrupting nature of the chakra rod. Naruto was never one to turn down a prime opportunity though, and Asura's enormous fist slammed down right on top of Tendo, buffeting the puppeteer's clothes with the shockwave. There was no playing it safe with this one though, and the hand rose again, replaced by Asura's other fist in a brutal ground punch that deepened the crater. Right, left, right, left. Asura's fists descended again and again, only speeding up as they got into the rhythm of it. Ground-shaking strikes that threatened to throw Naruto back from the sheer force of the blows. He should have been paying more attention. His only warning was the sudden disappearance of all of Pain's summoned animals across the village. The 7th blow descended, and froze in midair, held back by a curtain of invisible force. Pain slowly picked himself up in the center of the 6-foot depression. His cloak was practically falling off his body, ripped and torn against the slim spikes driven into his body. Far from the cultured, implacable gaze that hadn't been so much as stirred throughout this entire invasion, Pain now wore a mask of cold fury. Already intimidating Rinnegan eyes were intense and steely, almost appearing to glow as he raised a hand directly upwards. "Shinra Tensei." It was a cold, harsh whisper, but a whisper that seemed to brush all of creation aside as everything around the man was blown back indiscriminately. Naruto barely saw Asura's body arc up into the air, like a toy tossed aside by a child, as his own perspective tumbled helplessly along with his body. He hit something, feeling his neck twist uncomfortably as his vision swam. It snapped into focus in time for Pain to step into view, staring down at him with eyes that seemed to burn through the blonde. Those ringed eyes narrowed and Pain's lips twisted in irritation. He raised his arm to the side and the real Naruto suddenly flew out of his hiding spot. No more tricks. Seconds stretched out into minutes as the wind was blasted from Naruto's lungs. A searing pain screamed at him distantly, somewhere to his left. Hazy eyes watched something limp flying away from them through blurred vision, trailing glittery arcs of crimson. There was a disconnect between mind and body, all of it feeling like a dream. Then he gasped, and the cold knife stabbing into his chest sharpened the image back into reality. He was roughly slammed into the ground, and it was only when he instinctively sought out a nearby puppet with his chakra threads and nothing happened that he realized what had happened. Pain had cut off his left arm. The pain itself was muted by adrenaline and fear, and the chakra rod that was promptly driven into his side felt like an ordinary punch. The substitution he had instinctively been attempting with Dami's battered form was smothered in its crib as his chakra control went haywire. Those had been annoying when they disrupted his puppets. Actually having one in him was a different story entirely. It was like he was aware of his entire chakra network for the first time in his life, but it was locked away behind an impossibly thick sheet of glass. What had once flowed freely and nimbly to his mind's whim, powerful, but directed, now felt like a sluggish soup, tantalizingly out of reach. There was pain too, his will imbued in the rod feeling like a boulder pressing down on his chest. Underneath all of that was an enormous pressure Naruto knew all too well. Enough struggling, Pain growled, the first hint of emotion in his voice since this entire debacle began. See the futility of your resistance. He stood, confident in the chakra rod's ability to keep Naruto from doing anything. I have already won. Konoha falls around you, and Kumo will soon follow. Your petty struggles are merely the flailing of a child, unable to grasp the larger picture. Naruto coughed, a trickle of blood escaping the corner of his mouth. All the same, he grinned. You really like the sound of your own voice, don't you? Pain's eyes narrowed and he stepped forward, pausing when Naruto gave a choking laugh. Wouldn't do that, won't learn where Conan is. Naruto wasn't really expecting Pain to fall for it, but after seeing his reaction to the hanged puppet, he had to try. The slight hesitation was all he needed and Pain's eyes widened as flaming orange strings of chakra lashed onto his body. As somebody I once respected said, Naruto choked out, revealing the bloody chakra rod in his hand, a real puppeteer isn't defeated while there's still a body left to control. He lurched forward and stabbed the sharpened spike right through Pain's stomach, already feeling his control over the path waver and break. The rod brought him up short again, now practically flooded with Naruto's chakra as he had been shunting everything he could into it during Pain's speech. The gamble, that the disruption of control could work both ways, paid off. Dami closed the distance in the precious seconds Pain spent fighting his own body and slammed the Rasengan into the corpse's back with the force of a train. Naruto didn't let up, feeding the puppet chakra until his hand spasmed from the exertion, willing that slim wooden form to keep drilling down with the technique until it burst out Pain's chest. Only when the Rinnegan faded from the man's eyes did Naruto allow himself to fall back, lacking the strength to even catch himself with Dami. He panted on the ground, feeling the adrenaline slowly fade away, replaced by the aching throb coming from what used to be his left arm. He glanced at it and winced. It was severed neatly at the shoulder, and the sight of the bloody stump wiggling like that nearly made him sick. That's going to take some getting used to, he mumbled weakly, before slumping to the side. A monster, that's what he was. Kisame had once been called the monster of the hidden mist, back when he was still one of the swordsmen, before he gained the moniker the tailless-tailed beast. Right now though, he thought the name far more fitting for the creature in front of him. Red skin bulging with veins, white eyes devoid of irises, wreathed in a shimmering halo of rapidly evaporating sweat. Might Guy was a monster. The man's attack had decimated him water dome, evaporating the liquid through the sheer frictional force of his punches. Kisame might have been able to retaliate, if not for the man's next attack. He had created some kind of solid air shockwave that utterly crushed anything in his path. Kisame had done the smart thing in that situation, and avoided the technique at all costs. Easier said than done. The self-proclaimed green beast was still looking for him, and likely only hadn't found him yet because he was fully merged with Samehada, indistinguishable from the sword itself. He urged the blade to scuttle forward again, slowly but surely making his way towards the wall. He froze as another team of Anbu raced by overhead, looking like nothing more than a strange, discarded weapon amongst the chaos. My foe. The dreaded voice called out, and if sword-human hybrids could flinch, Kisame made a good attempt at it. We have not yet concluded our climactic battle for supremacy. This fleeing is most unyouthful. He breathed a sigh of relief as the spandex eyesore flew by overhead. He hadn't been found, the man was just that boisterous. He scuttled forward again, hugging the shadows. He should be completely undetectable like this, not even registering as a living chakra signature to the most powerful senses. It didn't ease his nerves anymore as his opponent continued darting about overhead, searching frantically for him. He turned a corner only to spot a strange, if welcome sight. Tobi. The Nara and the Hyuga proved an irritating combination. Youths, looking ridiculous in their Junin flak jackets, yet able to keep him on the defensive. Without his Jeongu, he may have fallen prey to one of the Nara's many layered traps. They had managed to get his lightning heart, and with his wind heart currently in his chest, that cut off two of his best combinations. The brat apparently knew as much, as he forestalled any attempt to return the water heart and switch it out. The Hyuga should have been more manageable, now that he knew about the little trick with her hands. It was a simple matter of predicting where she would strike and covering the area in thick knots of Jeongu. They dispersed the force easily, but before he could ensnare the girl and rip one of those frustrating little arms off, the Sarutobi would dart in. He had already proven that his trench knives could slice right through the Jeongu if they were exposed enough. It wasn't an admission of loss to admit that slowly, he was being worn down. It was slightly more grating that he hadn't managed to kill a single bounty yet, but between the Hyuga, the Wind User, and the Nara with his flawless teamwork with the Yamanaka and Akamaiki, no opportunities were presented. He growled as he felt another group of shinobi closing in, probably one of the Anbu squads that had been freed up since pain-summoned animals all abruptly vanished. He willed his two external masks to fly upwards, merging into a single mass of writhing black cords. They breathed out twin streams of water and flame at the same time, blanketing the area in a veil of scalding mist. Apparently, the Nara had been waiting for something like that as he used the dim lighting the mist created to lock the Jeongu construct in place. Higher. Chobaika no Jutsu. The Akamaiki grew to 20 times his original size, towering over the surrounding houses as he brought his hands together. Kakazu barely saved his fire heart by having it unravel from its counterpart, feeling the latter crushed into oblivion. He was losing too much from this and not gaining anything in return, and that was just bad business. With that in mind, the sinewy body of his remaining external heart swelled up like a balloon before releasing a cascade of fire at random down on the streets below. Using that as cover, Kakazu sprinted away. A tactical retreat. He barely rounded the corner when he felt somebody place a hand on his shoulder. He hardened his skin and pivoted in order to crush their chest, only to feel the entire world begin to distort and swirl, swiftly consumed by darkness. He spat out a bloody curse, quite literally more blood than words. Sharpened wooden stakes seemed to stab every inch of his body, bringing any kind of movement completely out of the question. They were no illusions either, but real, solid wood that sapped away even his immortal strength. The wooden man was a pain. Without a drop of blood for hidden to steal, he might as well have been a chair, for all he could affect him. He hadn't even introduced himself, just going about his business in that creepy, silent way Anbu had. It hadn't lasted long after he arrived, and soon the last priest of Jashin found himself buried in a deep hole, formed from a Doton technique, looking more like a pincushion than a man. He forced his head up, tearing his own flesh against the wooden spikes, and glared at the masked man. He was unable to properly vent his fury either, thanks to the spike going through the back of his head and forcing his mouth open. He looked up just in time to see the man finish his chain of hand seals. The walls of his sunken prison gave a warning shudder before slowly closing in, looking to seal him up completely. Just as the darkness was about to overtake him, he felt the air shift unnaturally. He caught sight of a flash of orange and a spinning red eye before the world twisted out from under him. The earth prison closed with a ponderous groan, void of its prisoner. Tobi drifted through scenes of chaos and discord, smiling. The Akatsuki may have been few in number, but their power matched that of an army. Shinobi scrambled around him to arrest the damage, searching destroyed or flooded buildings for civilians that might not have evacuated in time. The injured were rushed towards the various emergency staging points, on stretchers or anything else that would suffice. Many more lay in quiet corners, dead. The victims of any one of the red-clouded members' paths of destruction. Here was one with deep gouges in triplicate across his chest, Hidden's work. Another had an arm torn off, no doubt Kakazu deciding he wasn't worth the effort of cashing in. The burned ones he attributed to Deodara, likely in the Mad Bomber's initial salvo. Pain might have ultimately failed in capturing the Kyuubi, but the destruction wreaked on Konoha would be remembered. If he was lucky, it might even ignite a power struggle. There was nothing like diverting attention from a larger threat with the petty squabbles of greedy ninja leaders. He shifted again. Swirling in and out of his Kamui dimension had become as easy as breathing. He appeared on a street a few blocks from where Deidara was fighting that man. Kami, how tempting it would be to just appear behind him and stab him in the back. But no, he had given up on this world, and all of the pain and grievances that came with it. A Konoha shinobi spotted his cloak and pounced, trying to run him through with a sword. Behind his mask, Tobi rolled his eyes in bemusement as the blade passed right through his body without any resistance. Off balance, the man was easy prey for a kunai in the neck. He went down gurgling blood, eyes still wide with confusion. He turned his eye back to the conflict, and could already tell that Deidara was swiftly losing steam. The damage to his arm was too much, and he was capitalizing on it mercilessly. The blonde tried to unveil some kind of masterpiece that Tobi was unfamiliar with, although given the Iwa Nin's naming scheme, this, C4, would at least be more powerful than his C3. Tobi had witnessed that one's destructive capabilities firsthand, and had to admit that if the Jinchuriki's puppet hadn't caught it, half of Konoha would have been wiped out in an instant. Deidara got too caught up in the moment and noticed the genjutsu too late. Kakashi had already neutralized the clay with a healthy dose of Raiten chakra and was well on his way to finishing the nuke Nin off. Tobi figured that was his cue to intervene, only for Deidara to abruptly rip his cloak off. It was the last straw for his arm, and the few bloody sinews keeping it attached were ripped clean. The man barely seemed to notice in his crazed state, unstitching the mouth on his stomach. Tobi was already beginning to swirl away when he announced his intentions to use himself as a bomb, but was beaten to the punch. Even as the former Iwa Nin began to fade away, consumed into his darkening chakra network, the little black ball he was becoming swirled and contorted. Tobi snapped back into reality with a scowl. How dare Kakashi use his eye like that? How dare he pollute the Mangekyo born from Rin's sacrifice? Deidara was twisted out of existence and Tobi followed suit. He was too angry, and wasn't certain of what he might do if he didn't leave immediately. He needed to go and check on Itachi, the only rogue variable in all of this. The loss of Deidara had been one thing, but he couldn't afford for that part of his plan to go awry. He knew, of course, that the Uchiha scion would ignore pain in favor of his personal business with his brother. In fact, he was counting on it. Sasuke would make such a useful tool, with the right encouragement. It was almost a shame nobody had been around to see their struggle. From the outside, it would have been a good show. In the thick of it though, Itachi knew that a single misstep would spell disaster. He wanted his brother to defeat him, for that to be the legacy of the Uchiha, and not the awful plans his father had been scheming. It couldn't happen quite yet though. For one, there was still that blight on his brother's shoulder, that little sliver of the snake. He wasn't entirely sure what happened in that forest 3 years ago, but he could make an educated guess that it was Naruto who had sealed the curse mark. A mixed blessing that, if Sasuke didn't know about it, he couldn't be tempted into its use. But, it also meant that it would be extremely difficult to remove subtly. Then there was the other problem, but he was working on that. A streak of black fire consumed his illusory copy, and he allowed the genjutsu to fade. It revealed him reclining against a tree almost casually, although he was in fact on the other side of the clearing. Does your vision fade, little brother? How bad has it become now? You seem well versed in the Mangekyo's prowess, but what cost have you deemed sufficient for that power? He allowed something of a mad grin to alight in his clone's lips. It was an expression he would never willingly make, too maniacal. The light in my own eyes is nearly gone, consumed by the Sharingan's price. He could tell that rankled Sasuke. It was an aggravating thought that Itachi still seemed so far ahead of him even though he was practically blind. But you share these eyes, don't you, little brother? You've read the message on the tablet too. Sasuke tensed, and Itachi instantly knew he had. It wasn't he kind of knowledge easily forgotten or ignored. And you know then, why I encouraged you to gain these eyes. Because only another Mangekyo can restore the light to my own. Yours, little brother. Sasuke started, having been so caught up in Itachi's speech, he hadn't noticed how close his older brother had come until Itachi lifted his fingers inches from his forehead. He swiped up in a panic, Chidori instinctively flowing down his blade. The Itachi he cleaved through was just another illusion though, and the real one appeared from behind, engaging him in a rapid back and forth with a kunai. It didn't last long from there. His little monologue had properly spooked Sasuke, as it was designed to do. He had specifically crafted it to conjure up the worst imagery in order to get under his brother's skin. A panicking shinobi didn't last long in a fight against even an equal opponent, and Sasuke was still far from Itachi's equal. He deftly avoided an overextended parry and was suddenly behind the younger teen, cutting the back of his legs. It was nothing that wouldn't heal given a bit of time, but for now it completely removed Sasuke's mobility from the equation. He stalked forward slowly, perfectly in step with the younger Uchiha scrabbling backwards. It was only when Sasuke's back brushed against a tree did they both pause, the sound of clapping breaking through the tension like glass. Bravo! Tobi called gleefully. I haven't seen a drama this good since the last Princess Gale film. He cocked his head as both Uchiha turned to look at him, one coolly, the other without comprehension. Oh. Don't mind me. Please continue, I believe we were just getting to the good part. Madara, Itachi greeted icily. What do you want? Sasuke glanced up at his brother in confusion. No true Uchiha would miss the name of their most famous, or infamous, ancestor. Oh. Nothing much. Although, I do have to argue against the waste of such a. He glanced at Sasuke and the teen jerked as he caught the Sharingan spinning slowly in the mask's single eye hole, natural young talent. I don't suppose you would mind handing him over. I'd be remiss in failing to teach a young Uchiha the true power of our clan, don't you think? This is not your business, the exile warned, eyes narrowing. Tobi, or Madara, simply laughed, striding over without a care. Oh. But I disagree. I have big plans for young Sasuke here, once we get a bit of truth in him of course. The single visible eye narrowed as Madara's tone suddenly darkened. And it's not like you could stop me Itachi, you can't hide from my eyes. The disease has almost reached full term, and I'd bet you're struggling to even stand right now. His eye seemed to glow in the evening light. How long do you have left after that much exertion? Days. Hours. Itachi continued to glower, but didn't refute him. In truth, the pain was nearly unbearable, and he had been forcing back coughs for the entire fight. Not so much as an ounce of it passed his stoic facade. So no, I believe I'll have a little chat with young Sasuke-kun. Perhaps it's his light that is better served being rekindled. He turned, setting a hand on Sasuke's shoulder and the younger teen immediately began to twist and distort. Itachi struck. It happened so fast that Tobi could only stare down at the glowing orange sword emerging from his chest with a wide, disbelieving eye. Itachi had waited so long for this exact moment, never once revealing the powers of his Susanoo to the man he suspected wasn't Madara, but knew to be almost as dangerous as. The sword of Totsuka was his secret alone, not another soul alive knew of its powers to seal away just about anything. All he had needed was a single moment of vulnerability, when Madara thought he had won and couldn't use his intangibility. So Itachi had practiced, and practiced, and practiced at releasing his Susanoo in a fraction of a second, all at the cost of his eye's deteriorating condition. All for this moment. Itachi wore his first genuine smile in years, one of grim satisfaction, as he watched Madara, or whoever he was, be drawn back into his Susanoo's gourd, cursed to wander in a drunken stupor for eternity. He felt something warm trickle down his cheek and knew it was blood. The strain of his Susanoo was too much for his overtaxed body. His legs gave out, but he knew he still had to sell the act. He clawed his way forward, looking deep into Sasuke's eyes with a crazed fervor. Your eyes are mine, little brother. His breaths were coming in sharp gasps now, and he had almost reached Sasuke's leg. Only, mine, Sasuke. His shuddering arm finally gave out, darkness encroaching on his vision as he implanted one last genjutsu in his brother, granting Sasuke one last gift, and ensuring his hatred. It was the only way, and he only hoped his brother wouldn't notice the tears mingling with the blood on his cheeks. Then, Uchiha Itachi knew nothing more, dying with his arm extended towards the last living Uchiha, face down in the mud. A shinobi's death. Kid. You there, kid. Time to get up. Naruto blinked his eyes open and groaned, feeling like a house had been dropped on him. His ingrained instincts forced him to look up, checking the position of the sun. No more than 5 minutes since he fell unconscious. Since he looked down at his arm, or what used to be his arm, and felt bile rise in his throat. He forced it back, and looked away, feeling lightheaded. Something was pressed into his hand, a blood pill. He swallowed it without protest and immediately felt it getting to work, taking the edge off how cold and weak he felt. When he finally felt up to it again, he looked back down at the stump of his former limb and grimaced. What the hell have you put on my arm? Something brown and slimy had been slathered over the wound. It seemed to have staunched the bleeding, but it smelled like rust and animal guts. Toad oil, and be glad about it, Jiraiya said as he pulled the blonde to his feet. That stuff's got incredible restorative powers. How incredible? Naruto asked immediately, only to see Jiraiya wince, regretting his words. Not that incredible. Sorry kid, even if we found your arm, there's not a medic in this village that could reattach it. He rubbed the back of his head. Maybe soon it could. No use dwelling on what ifs. Something unfamiliar passed across his features. Guilt. Naruto didn't have the energy nor the temperament right now to try and decipher someone else's emotions. He fumbled a moment, having attempted to reach into his jacket with the wrong arm. He glared at it a moment before using his good arm to grab a soldier pill. Kid, I'm not sure you should. Naruto ignored him and popped the food capsule into his mouth, sighing as he felt the pain ebb away, replaced by a sudden surge of energy. Naruto, it's not healthy to take blood pills and soldier pills in quick succession, and I'm betting you know that. Yeah, well, you know what else isn't healthy? The irate blonde shot back. Losing an arm. But I guess we're trying all sorts of things today. Now hurry up. It hasn't been too long, so we might still be able to catch up. Catch up? What are you talking about, kid? The Akatsuki are gone. They up and vanished a few minutes ago. Pain. Who else would I be talking about? He had to be nearby to control his puppet bodies, no more than a mile away by my guess. This might be our only opportunity to catch up to him. He was already moving, sliding uncertainly over the rubble and trying to get used to his new balance. Naruto, kid, don't push yourself. Naga, pain's probably long gone by now, if you just. He was brought up short as Naruto suddenly rounded on him, poking him in the chest. Stop calling me a kid. Now, are you going to act like the legendary fucking Sannin you're supposed to be? Or are you going to stand there looking helpless and guilty? If it's the former, then go grab a Hyuga, tell them what they need to know, and help me find this guy before he's able to regroup and do all of this again, because, if you hadn't fucking noticed, I only have so many arms to lose. He was breathing heavily by the end of the rant, staring straight into Jiraiya's widened eyes. When the man just stood there, like a deer staring down a fireball, he turned away in disgust. If not, then go help the other ninja searching through the rubble. I'm not letting this happen again. He found what he was looking for, Dami's mostly undamaged body, not too far from where Tendo lay. He sized it up for a moment, nodding. A chakra scalpel lit up around his hand and he sliced a clean cut through the puppet's left arm. He had to focus a moment, searching for the tenketsu from memory, but eventually he was able to cast a few chakra strings from his left shoulder, connecting them to the arm. It was crude, and makeshift, but it would do for now. He was lucky that Dami was essentially designed to be his perfect henge doppelganger, so the arm was almost proportionally identical to the real thing, if a bit heavier. The fingers also moved far less gracefully, and couldn't feel anything, but at least he had fingers again. Satisfied, he looked up to find Jiraiya staring back at him. He looked torn between being impressed at Naruto's stubbornness, and worried at the teen's condition. Not entirely unfounded, as Naruto was essentially running on a cocktail of adrenaline, righteous indignation, and drugs right now. This is almost certainly going to come down to a fight. Naruto, do you even have puppets left? He wilted under the teen's flat stare. Okay, dumb question, you always seem to have puppets. But I'm not joking. If that's who I think it is out there, then we'll be in for a damn hard fight. Harder than this? I doubt it. If I know one thing about puppeteers, and I know a lot about puppeteers, it's that we all hide behind our puppets for a reason. If this guy's using proxies, he motioned to where Tendo's body still lay unceremoniously, then he's doing it because they're stronger than he is. That, or he's afraid. Either way, I'm not backing down. Are you? The Toad Sage hesitated for only a moment before shaking his head, his face twisting into a mask of grim determination. Fine, I'll grab the nearest Hyuga and go, but just me. Nobody else needs to be put at risk for this. Naruto scowled. Like hell. This guy tried to kidnap me and rip the QB out of my stomach. Then he took my arm. Whatever personal thing you have to settle here, I don't give a shit. I'm going. He crossed his arms somewhat awkwardly, still getting used to the lack of sensation from his left hand. Now, hurry up and find a Hyuga before my pills wear off. Naruto wasn't a big believer in providence, or fate. Still, he thought it was one hell of a coincidence when Jiraiya met him at the village wall with a familiar head of violet hair. Guess who I ran into? The white-haired man greeted, blustering past the discomfort he still so clearly felt. Hinata didn't pay any mind to his unusual exuberance, flashing a quick smile at Naruto before motioning outward, into the woods. The person you were looking for is still close, I can still see their lingering chakra in the air. She hesitated a moment. He's the one who caused all this. Their leader. Then she glanced down and her eyes widened. Naruto, your arm. He forced himself not to look and just waved her off with his good hand. It's nothing. Come on, if he's still close we might not have much time before he gets away. He darted up and over the wall, forcing the other two to follow him. Hinata quickly fell into step beside him, sending furtive looks at his makeshift prosthetic as she guided them further into the forest. He wished Jiraiya could have found literally any other Hyuga. He didn't really need this right now. I said I'm fine, Hinata. He tried for a nonchalant grin, but it must have come off strained. You know how good I am with limbs, I'll be able to whip up a new, better arm in no time. Well, as soon as he sorted out the mess of his collapsed building. Damn, he had almost managed to forget that. He glanced back across at her, noting that her concern seemed to have shifted. What's wrong? She glanced down as she ran, lips twisting. So many people, I passed so many dead people. I thought I was used to it, from the war, but, I recognized so many of them, so many innocents. She looked up at him, and he was genuinely surprised to see tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. How could somebody do that? Why would somebody do that? Jiraiya chose that moment to fall into step, face uncharacteristically grave. His name is Nagato, and before we confront him, there's some things you should know. It only took about 5 minutes sprinting to reach the cave where Nagato had chosen to base himself. Naruto was right, he was less than a mile out from the village, in a hollowed-out depression beneath an enormous tree. That was enough time for Jiraiya to fill them both in on the basics of his history with the man. The little kid he found in Amno Kuni bearing a set of legendary eyes alongside 2 other orphans, his decision to stray and train them, eventually hearing that they had died. Naruto wisely kept quiet about the fact that he still had Conan sealed in a scroll in his jacket. It was Hinata who gasped first, catching sight of the man long before either of them. When they descended into the cavernous hollow, Naruto could see why. Nagato was a shell of a man. He was dangerously emaciated, with thin, papery skin stretched over his prominent ribs. His sunken cheeks were nearly covered by a mop of dull red hair, and he was only kept upright by some kind of huge machine that covered his lower body, acting as a set of large, crab-like legs. Naruto thought it impressive this man was even still alive, what with the dozen or so chakra rods plunged into his back like some obscene parody of a porcupine's quills. For a man claiming to be a god, it looked like a strong breeze would bowl him over. The only thing even remotely intimidating about him was the set of steely ringed eyes that, even with his invalid's body, gleamed with intense energy. Those same eyes regarded each of them carefully as they emerged into the dim hole, lit only by a few streaks of light filtering in through the roots above. Jiraiya-sensei, he rasped. Come to finish me off. I assure you that, even with this frail body, I will not go quietly. Answers Nagato, Jiraiya replied, a pleading edge to his tone. I just want to understand what all of this is about. What happened to you 3? Last I heard you were dead, and now I find you've been leading the Akatsuki. Speak for yourself, Naruto growled, pointing his wooden arm at the cripple. I am here to finish you off. You attacked my village, tried to kill me, and succeeded in taking my arm. Nagato sneered at him, apparently a great deal more expressive than his commandeered bodies. The Jinchuriki. You have no idea what plans you derailed with your infantile struggling. Naruto just glared right back, baring his teeth. His usually top-notch self-control had been thoroughly trampled on by a mixture of trauma and exhaustion. He wanted nothing more than to kill this bastard, go home and start rebuilding everything he had been forced to destroy. He would have come alone, if he thought he could actually do it alone. As it was, if Jiraiya wasn't on board, there was probably little he could do in his state. The man in question lay a hand on his shoulder, giving him a similarly pleading look. Please Naruto, let me handle this. When the blonde begrudgingly acquiesced, he turned back to his former student. What plans, Nagato? What could all of this have possible been for? Rinnegan eyes narrowed for a moment, before softening slightly. Peace, sensei. Exactly as you taught us to strive for. Exactly what Yahiko championed every second we fought against Hanzo's tyranny. Exactly what the Akatsuki has been striving for since its inception. Peace. Hinata whispered, no longer able to keep quiet. You call that unnecessary slaughter peace? There was an unusual heat to her tone, and Naruto realized that he might not be alone if he decided to go over Jiraiya's head on this. How could you justify killing so many innocent people? She didn't even flinch when Nagato turned his full attention to her. And how many died when Konoha and Kumo waged war? Shinobi preached that they keep civilians, customers, out of the line of fire. But tell me, what happens to the farmers when their fields are burned down to cripple a daimyo's income? What about the merchants forced to take unguarded, bandit-strewn roads because a bridge was too important of a supply route? Don't talk to me about innocent lives, you, a Hyuga. What do you know of starvation, or living out in the cold because two people whose faces you will never see decided that a particular strip of land was worth drenching in other people's blood? He pulled one of his arms out of the machine with a wet squelch, only to slam it down in front of him. I was trying to create something real, something that would last. Not the fantastical piece of your books, sensei, but something that could actually be achieved. Through death and violence. Jiraiya asked, torn between sadness and disbelief. Through understanding, Nagato shot back. Only people who have experienced pain can understand the need for peace. With the Jinchuriki, I could have created a weapon powerful enough that even a single use would have united the world in a shared understanding. That's not peace, Nagato, that's fear, Jiraiya stated, voice still twinged by sadness, but with a steely undercurrent. And then what? You're no god, you can't live forever. What happens when somebody else gets a hold of your weapon? What happens if it's used again? You think I'm so short-sighted, sensei? I fully intend for the weapon to be used repeatedly. Jiraiya actually took a step back in shock, and the man continued, heedless. I understand human nature, the intrinsic greed and avarice that holds us back. People will forget their lesson. Pain will fade into memory. Then the weapon will be used again, by somebody who doesn't understand, and it will create a new piece. A constant cycle, with only a few thousand lives lost in an instant, painless deaths. He looked back down, daring Jiraiya to meet his eye. That is why I was blessed with these eyes, to grant my peace to the world, from one who understands its suffering. A strangled silence descended over the hollow, before Naruto shattered it by snorting. You honestly think that would work? He had only grown angrier through the entire diatribe. That ridiculous plan is why I lost an arm. Now I'm not just angry, I'm fucking insulted. Nagato turned to retort, but the blonde didn't give him a chance. You don't understand a damn thing about human nature. Sure, we're greedy, and selfish, and what you describe would probably work, at first. But you missed something pretty bloody important about people. We really hate being told what to do. He shook his head, sucking his teeth to stop his language getting more colorful. You think that some weapon would make the world cow down and get along like happy little bunnies. You're delusional. We'd fight, constantly, to destroy it. To destroy the one who used it. You wouldn't be ending war, you'd just be changing it. He pointed at Nagato, this time with his good arm. Face it, you have no clue if this would ever work. When you do something like that. He took a deep breath and reined himself in, voice quieting. When you do something like this, you can never see all the possible consequences, and you certainly can't control it. You think your eyes make you any different. Then all they've done is blind you. He reached into his jacket to pull out a scroll, shrugging off Jiraiya when the man tried to hold his shoulder again. Please Naruto, this doesn't have to come down to violence. No, sensei, Nagato called out, glaring at the blonde with a singular intensity. I think it does. It's clear that you will never understand my vision. You will never understand the responsibility I bear. He pulled his other arm out of the machine, folding his hands together in a ram seal. Hasn't enough blood been spilled today? Jiraiya pleaded. Naruto rolled his shoulders with a cold scowl, Hinata slowly settling into her taijutsu stance beside him. Nagato was the one to make the first move though, slamming his hands down in front of him. Kuchio's no jutsu. The cloud of smoke that erupted around him was large enough to rival a boss summon, but the creature that emerged was no giant toad. It had the proportions of a human, but with stone gray skin and an elongated, blindfolded face. 9 eyes bulged gruesomely from the stony cloth, 2 of them closed. It crouched around Nagato protectively, nearly filling up the confined space with its bulk. It seemed to hover there uncertainly for a moment, before it looked down at the 3 shinobi and screamed. It pounced forward, large enough to crush them with each of its huge hands. The space was filled with another explosion of smoke, and something was there to meet it. Asura's hands locked with the creature's, managing to hold it back despite its immense strength. She was badly damaged already though, half her chest caved in from Tendo's final attack, and the wood of her arms was letting out protesting groans. All Naruto needed was a moment though, and he and Hinata both rushed forward. His right arm came up, releasing a gout of concentrated flame from the refined mechanism strapped to his arm. It splashed harmlessly against a barrier of pure force, but was a good enough distraction for Hinata to leap over it, descending with her fingers aglow with chakra. 4 more arms burst from Nagato's shoulders, imitating Shurado with their mechanical nature. 6 arms were more than enough to bat away every attempted Juken strike. Despite his frail, weakened appearance, Nagato was extremely fast. One of the extra arms lashed out, catching Hinata by the wrist and roughly throwing her back across the hollow. A chakra rod followed her, formed from thin air by another arm and thrown in a fraction of a second. It was caught midair and slammed back into Nagato's chest. The emaciated man lurched forward, blood spraying from his mouth. He blinked in confusion, staring down at the black rod sticking out of his heart, before glancing up at Jiraiya uncomprehendingly. "I'm sorry Nagato, but you've gone too far." Jiraiya let go of the rod, catching his former student as he fell back, no longer supported by his machine. Sensei, I tried, Sensei, Nagato murmured weakly, blood pouring from his wound. Yahiko, I never meant to. I know Nagato, I know, the older man whispered back softly, slowly letting Nagato's body lie back as his eyes drooped. And I'm sorry, for not being there for you 3, like I should have been. But Nagato was already gone, dull eyes staring forward at nothing. Jiraiya closed them with a hand, letting his own shut for a moment in a silent apology. Above them, the creature Nagato summoned froze, before vanishing in another cloud of smoke. Jiraiya breathed a long sigh before standing up and turning back to Naruto and Hinata. The latter had her head lowered respectfully, even if she didn't quite understand why. The former was observing Jiraiya, and the way the red tattoos under his eyes had lengthened inexplicably. You 2 should head back to the village, there's going to be a lot of work to do after all of this. He took a deep breath, glancing back at Nagato's body. I'll deal with everything here. Naruto wanted to question him about the sudden sense of power that was slowly fading around the Sannin, but Hinata took his hand, leading him away. Come on, she said with a weak attempt at a smile. They're going to need all the hands they can get. He hesitated, before allowing himself to be led away, leaving the older man to his mourning. Even he wasn't that tone deaf. He tried for a somewhat lopsided smile himself, although he was certain it looked as hollow as it felt. Yeah, because if I have anything, it's a lot of hands. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.